All right. Well, thank you. This is the capstone to an incredible day. Massive thanks to Tyler and Second Front. It's been a really amazing program so far. I think what makes today's last panel the most exciting part is that we get to see the human element in everything that we've talked through. So the conversation that Tyler just led with is understanding the evolution, the innovation, and the scale, but by way of these particular individuals. So I will let them introduce themselves and then we'll kick it off.
Likewise, want to thank Peter and Tyler and the Second Front team for putting on the symposium. I know it's been a fantastic day of content for you all. We'll offer a little bit of meat before the drinks to follow. I would ask and moderator's prerogative to open this up to questions after about 30 minutes. We don't want to end the day just spewing words at you, rather give you an opportunity to leverage the content over the course of the day to ask us some questions. And I'd say, fitting to be able to talk at a symposium named after the offset strategy. So I spent the better part of my career in the department working with and around Bob Work, spent last tour as his chief of staff over his last 2 years at DoD, and now have been fortunate to bring that same ethos and perspective in terms of how we're bringing both modern software, the benefits of autonomy and AI, into the heart of what Anduril is seeking to provide back into the department's program, as well as to our allies and partners. So over the course of the panel discussion today, I look forward to sharing a bit more about the scale and success that we've benefited from to date, some of the challenges that we have had and still have, and then what we need to do as a community to start to bring these capabilities at greater scale into the department's program. There are important operational problems that I know we're all focused on day in and day out, and those problems are what animate what we do and how we do it. We need the right policies, acquisition mechanisms in order to enable us to deliver that capability to the warfighter. So eager to talk about how this has played out at Anduril over the last 5 years, and look forward to the questions that will inevitably follow.
I do want to say that Zach has threatened to call on individuals in the audience if you don't come up with questions willingly. So I'm just going to put that little nugget out there.
Yeah, the professor in my past life still lurks in there somewhere.
I'm Winston Chang, so with Snowflake, and I just want to say, especially to Ty, that like in the background, this has been the best run of show that I've seen. So just really impressive, and the whole Second Front team did amazing. So cheers to them. I come from the SI community, where basically as a consultant for strategy, and then I flipped over to the technology side, especially given that technology drives so much of the transformation. So I'm super excited to be able to bring some of that perspective here, and looking forward to questions as well.
Thanks very much. So yeah, I'm Dave Ferris. I'm actually a retired Canadian infantry officer. My background sort of in the infantry environment in the Army. And then I ended up in the counter IED community for a few years. And then finally, that actually brought me down here to the Pentagon, where I worked on the Joint Staff for a couple of years before I retired and remained here in the DC area. I ended up, while I was in the counter IED community, working on a lot of the science and technology working groups, working within Five Eyes and within NATO. And so my transition out of the military was really into this government contracting environment, helping companies grow within DoD and the IC, and particularly with this, within our this ecosystem of our closest partners and allies. And I joined Interos about a year ago to lead that partner effort. And what we realized was that in order to grow and scale, our entire public sector program really was closely wedded to how we integrate with partners and how we work internationally and things like that. So looking forward to sort of bringing that perspective, a little bit of Canadian flair, of course, to the conversation. I'll sprinkle in the odd A and hockey joke, of course, even though I'm the one Canadian guy who can't skate. So take that for what it's worth, but appreciate the invitation and looking forward to the conversation. Thanks.
Fantastic. So I think that the way I would love to start off is, again, going back to that human element. We heard in the earlier panel about government versus private funding, about how we got here. And I thought that was a great question that Jamie asked. But that ecosystem that exists only exists because of the people that build it. So what I'd love to figure out from each of you, and so this is your one softball. Okay, this is it. This is what you get. Tell me how you educate the audience on your individual stories and where you got to today, understanding that there was probably some very painful but important lessons learned. Maybe better yet, what didn't you know that you wish you had as you scaled?
Right. I'll take that first. Yeah, I guess to roll back the tape a little bit pre-Anduril. So when I had the good fortune to join Bob as his chief of staff in 2014, like many things in life, you try to position yourself well, do all the right things, intentionally approach how you're growing your career, but life can be somewhat serendipitous. I presumed I was leaving government well before Bob approached me about being his chief of staff. My kids at the time were 3 and 1. As you all know, for those folks that service, whether in government or service in the private sector, and contribution support to government mission, it is in many ways a passion, a mission, an ethos, and it's at times difficult to turn that off. I know myself well and know that governor is hard, and my kids were young. I was fortunate enough that, had perspective and a supportive wife who, when Bob called and said, I would like you to serve one more time, she was like, I'm giving you 2 years. So I went back to Bob and I was like, I'm going to give you 2 years. And what animated my both my willingness to continue in service, was born out of a slightly longer history with Bob when he was Undersecretary of the Navy, and focused on, at the time, a capital ship inventory that was coming down. At the same time that the need for density of assets and payloads in and across the Indo-Pacific was never greater. How can we use the benefits of modern software, more agile development of both payloads and platforms to deploy and orchestrate those payloads to understand the environment, to be able to make decisions about how to affect that environment? And he had a theory about what he wanted to tackle in his last 2 years as deputy secretary that was incredibly compelling. And a lot of it was shifting the way that the department incentivized industry to build toward its problems. And a lot of that was breaking down barriers to understanding where the best and brightest of commercial technology development was beginning. And a lot of it, not to the discredit of the defense industrial base, but around elements of modern software, around AI, around autonomous systems, as well as the autonomy stack to operate not a given asset, but multiple assets against a mission, was largely happening outside of the DIB ecosystem. We needed to open up the department to those areas of commercial technology development, take advantage of and leverage that private capital and technology investment, start to turn it toward the somewhat unique requirements of certain military missions, and expose the problem set to a set of commercial actors that, were the original legacy of the defense industrial base. If you turn back the clock to the origins of Silicon Valley, we've lost that over time. And part of the origin of, Mike spoke on a panel earlier today, part of the origin of the Defense Innovation Unit was to return that door to Silicon Valley, open up the department, its problems, as well as its opportunities in terms of funded dollars to start to bring some of those capabilities in. Fast forward to now arriving at Anduril just over 2 years ago. Part of what we have sought to do is take advantage of the seed corn that I was fortunate to be a part of investing and building while in government, and start to build capability both against those acquisition mechanisms, against those defined problems, building that modern software stack and autonomy that's ultimately now delivering across multiple service programs. We can get into some of the eaches and the stories around how we approached that initial problem set, how we scoped it, how we built scale within a program. I know not everybody's company is the same. Some are built around one product to market fit. Anduril is a bit different in that we're working across multiple software stacks. We're working across multiple hardware platforms, both US as well as allied and partner programs. So how we think about scale is not necessarily analogous to some of the scale challenges that you all face today, but we can start to boil down some of the specific programs and hopefully provide you some nuggets for what we've learned and perhaps harder lessons that you all can benefit from as you take it forward.
So I think one of the big lessons that I appreciated coming from a host of different size companies, whether they're large SMEs or even startups, is this interplay between market making and sales, right? And the dirty secret from technology companies is that sales is like the incredible driver, right? Sales is the thing. As much as people love to talk about the technology, it's like sales that actually generates everything. But then sales only works so well as much as there's market making in it. And so coming from a time when like I had to do both sides of it in a small business to at a big company like Snowflake, where I get to focus solely on market making because frankly, I'm not a good salesperson, is just interesting. So I think of it two sides of the same coin. And I think if you want to be really successful, you kind of should be thinking the same way from a framework.
So I'll look at this kind of from the Interos perspective. So we started in 2005 actually as a professional services company. So I joined the company just under 2 years ago. Professional services from 2005 to 2012 when we built the first sort of product, I'll say. And so that transition from a professional services company to now a SaaS, technology company working with those professional services partners, there's been some mental shifts within the company that had to occur. And we still have some of those legacy contracts actually, and they're a little bit painful to manage as we're still navigating our way out of this professional services hat that we sometimes wore. And so I think what has been a benefit to our company, we're small, we're just under 300 people right now. We've got a team of folks that think sort of in this agile manner, and they're able to switch back and forth and make sure that we can support the customer as best we can. Because, for us, our growth trajectory hinges, obviously, like all of us, on the customer experience and what are solving those hard problems for our customers. But the way we have to approach solving those problems, whether it's those legacy kind of professional services contracts that we've worked on, or now as a technology company, that's I think not unique certainly to Interos, but something that we've had to contend with over the last few years. And then we'll still have to deal with it going forward until we really shed that professional services element to the company.
Thank you. Winston, I actually would love to build a little bit about you, how you talked about the need to consider market making. So as each of your kind of different perspectives on navigating the department while also planning for and accommodating a potential continuing resolution, fiscal uncertainty, especially as we look towards the debt limit talks, as we heard of earlier. How do you work within the department to make sure that market making is aligned with where you are? But then, Dave, you talking about accounting for the legacy services. Where do you find that balance?
So it's interesting because the third part, especially that I would say in regulated markets, so public sector obviously, is the addressability, right? Are you compliant? Can you even do that? So Snowflake right now is not truly addressable to DoD because we're not on the high side. We will be, and it's in our plan. And, like most of you who've worked with tech companies, there's sort of that stage growth to get there. But I would definitely add in that second or that third layer across that. In terms of market making though, especially with public sector, and I think you were bringing this up really well, is the integrators are so key to the ecosystem, right? So I look at it as like really, how do you seed and how do you drive the ecosystem to thrive specifically with your technology? So in our case, that means engaging, big tech will go right out and say, here's the biggest addressable market, your biggest TAM, total addressable market, and it'll be the GSIs. So they'll go straight for them. But we all here know the incredible importance of small business. We know how critical that is in this space. So you have to be able to make and design a program that is scalable from a human process standpoint, not just a technology standpoint, that can address that can activate the small businesses on your behalf, right? So those are all things that we have to consider when it comes to market making and how do we build the ecosystem to best adopt and integrate our technology. The plus side being at Snowflake is I'm not really worried about our technology, frankly. It's really good. I'm more worried about, is there a way to actually adopt it? Because if there isn't, we still die on the vine.
Yeah, so I think as a professional services company in our early days, we were still doing supply chain risk management, right? We were doing it with people and spreadsheets and email surveys and phone calls to our customers, doing vendor due diligence in that way. So we're still solving the same problem. So I think for us, as we've become this, this technology company, we want to do what we're really good at, which is supply chain risk management. We're doing that now through ingesting data and through our platform. But our customers still need that service element sometimes. Some of our customers have asked about just having analysts, business analysts, supply chain analysts, and things like that. So we want to grab onto partners and let them be really good at what they're really good at, right? So to your point, Winston, the integrators are small business partners, and we've let the market sort of dictate where we need to go and with which partners, because they're, not all partners are created equal, and they don't have the same presence or capability within different environments in the public sector.
I really appreciate the kind of different take on the dying on the vine in your words about making sure that the capability, the technology resonates. You have to have an area where it will make sense. If you talk about partnerships, and maybe Zach, you can kind of kick us off here. We've overly probably beaten the horse that is the valley of death. We continue to hear from both DoD leaders and congressional members about the importance of figuring out different pathways to overcome that. You mentioned earlier about reopening that door to Silicon Valley and making sure those problem sets reemerge to the people that can help solve them creatively. So if you think about partnerships, the role of partnerships to help make sure that there is an avenue to bring your technology into the department, in this case, the wider global governments, where do you see kind of your biggest successes and the challenges overcoming those particular aspects of the valley of death?
Yeah, the DIU, in a sense, and I say this with a lot of love and affection for the ecosystem that has been built around it, both externally as well as across other innovation units within the department, is the door opened, a lot of non-dilutive, lot's relative, non-dilutive capital went out, focused on certain problems against a select set of technology solutions. But in general, from the start, and I'd say yet still today, for most businesses that are seeking some level of scale to eventually access public markets, the nature of those dollars and the paths to actually transitioned service-funded programs are still less likely the outcome of a DIU-funded effort or another innovation system-funded effort than not. And I think one challenge for the department is to assess, like, now that it is for the better part of the last 7 years diligenced the market with selected cultivated problems. They've identified those innovative companies that have addressable technology. How are they concentrating that capital to actually focus, scale, and delivery? And where can OSD as a mechanism bring those funds, the acquisition authority, to be able to offset the way a service program manager might be seeking to risk manage and protect the status quo program that they own? Where we've been fortunate to, in some ways, surmount the challenges of the traditional valley of death is that I think one thing that the department still struggles to conceptualize how to leverage is our private capital investments. We're Anduril's blessed over our several series of raises to have both committed and seriously vested investors. As you all would expect, some of you in that similar camp, they expect a return on that capital investment. The department, and I think Catherine Boyle admonished, I think in a healthy way, department leadership going into the Reagan National Defense Forum 2 years ago. And I think that admonishment remains true. The department still does not understand the value and leverage that private capital flows are providing them to de-risk that technology development up to a TRL level that's actually adoptable. So they're giving them the best of that ecosystem at a fraction of the cost that NRE is otherwise bearing out. And we've done a lot to try to risk mitigate and kind of arbitrage that risk across our investments by matrixing our engineering organization. So we have multiple products, but they're serviced by core functional engineering orgs, both software and hardware. And it's on top of those commercially developed platforms that we can then compose mission system solutions as we work with operational users and then back with the program office to identify against very defined requirements how to take that 80% commercial technology platform up to mission. And sometimes we find ourselves walking low and slow in that valley. And we've got the good fortune to have built a engineering organization, a capital allocation structure to be able to allocate that capital as it's finding actual fit to market transition. Not everyone is so fortunate. And so I think raising up as a group, the challenges that the department is still going to continue to face as it seeks to scale companies, not just scale technologies into fielded programs. It's one of the least well appreciated, I think, upside values of the SBIR program. SBIR programs have tremendous value across the small business ecosystem. The department tends to evaluate, and we'll use, pick your moniker, OKR, KPI, the number of contracts let through SBIR as opposed to the number of companies scaled or the number of programs scaled through SBIR. So their metrics are off. How do we help them better understand metrics that are actually geared toward fielding, whether it's enterprise technology solutions or mission solutions, how they make better use of levers they already have. Last thing I'll say, and I think it bears repeating because the department is saying it, they recognize it. We have to keep reminding them of it. They have, I would argue, all of the authorities that they need to gain access to and field and transition the technologies they say they want. It's about how you manage that trade-off and how you incentivize not just program acquisition executives, but their contracting officers understand how to manage that risk. And where does that risk lie? Does that risk lie in the status quo? Or does that risk lie with this technology that seems somewhat less proven? Okay, well, how can I de-risk that future in a way that makes acquiring that capability at some meaningful scale less risky than sustaining what we know to be the inadequate solutions that are being fielded today? So not necessarily the most constructive answer, I recognize. But again, I think we're fortunate in the fact that we can kind of risk arbitrage where we're finding ourselves in a valley to focus and concentrate that capital on things that are actually proving out at some scale. I would say that, don't be shy about turning back to those open doors in the valley that are now in Austin and Boston and here in DC and elsewhere to focus, encourage them to focus their efforts on those things that are actually proving themselves out through experimentation and demonstration. It's often the case that there's someone behind the door that's willing to bet on you. You've got to find that horse and ride it. And that's where Anduril's been benefited by having committed operational users and customers who are willing to take that first bet on us.
So I'll approach it from slightly different as a technology company that has, you know, a huge commercial application, not just defense. And so over the years, definitely have advised a number of small companies, and I've heard it, I think we heard earlier in the session, people like VCs will come and say, oh, you should go all cyber, you should do this. In terms of, if you have a commercial application, I would advise the exact opposite, and I do, right? Is like you need to build your commercial business first and then take it. And you just think of the sales cycle. So if you look at Snowflake, our sales cycle in the commercial sector is probably on average a little less than 3 quarters. You think of the sales cycle in the federal government is 18 months at minimum. So if we just think about iterations, we go through 4 iterations in the commercial sector versus 2 in, you know, or 3 or even more, right? So, and my math is obviously really bad, but it's just one of those things that I think is so critical because you need to be able to make that investment. And if you're in a commercial sector area, making the argument to the board is actually incredibly difficult. I would say just generally among people that I know who are operators in the public sector who come in to build public sector businesses, they never want to be the first one there because inevitably that person gets canned because you can never sell, you know, the growth fast enough because it just won't happen. That being said, the benefit, and you see this with like Snowflake, our commercial innovation is just so far in advance that, you know, arguably I could come in and say, we've already answered the first order question and the second and third, and we're working on the 4th because the commercial sector has already pushed it. Not every sector is going to be the same. Data kind of just has that thing where it does that. But in that case, we then have this huge benefit for the government. It's just going to take a while to fully realize it.
Race to the mic with Jessica. So I'll just add, Winston, those are great points. And what's interesting is that it's the exact opposite of our story, right? We started in 2005. Our first customer was DoD. And so we were able to make, you know, those early transitions and scale in those early days until 2018 solely in government and then pivot into the commercial market. But to your point now, you know, it is the pace of growth within our commercial practice, if you will, is impressive, right? And we're still fighting those long sales motions in federal. I think just to add around how we approach, you know, the global public sector market as we're expanding into that, you know, we're looking at things as simple as the fiscal year of our partners and allies and how our sales cycle and motions can those peaks and troughs can be offset, if you will, pun intended, to, you know, level set across different public sector elements globally. And for us, again, I'll say, you know, I heard recently someone say that our acquisition process is, you know, a strategic deterrent, our collective acquisition process. And so if we approach it from that perspective, you know, working within those Five Eyes and NATO partners to learn their processes and how we can scale our company working with them, it really does. It's equally as powerful, if you will, as the commercial, you know, growing inside that commercial market as well.
So what's the Canadian fiscal year calendar, A?
It's April 1st to March 31st. So it is almost opposite. Most of the Commonwealth countries are kind of around that. And then we also have, you know, the 4th quarter unspent money. So which is a good strategy, actually, when you're thinking about how you can sweep up those end of year funds. If you can sequence your calendar well enough. And then, of course, no one wants to travel to Canada in January, but that's when the unspent money is being sort of, you know, shopped around the floor. So you might be able to catch some hockey games, though. There you go.
So Dave, if you were king for a day and you could change, do away with, or enhance a DoD, we'll bring it back to the US because it's the easiest one to pick on, procurement policy, what would it be?
Yeah. So keeping in mind that this is the view from a Canadian maybe, but I do think, you know, we've already sort of alluded to all the authorities exist, right? We have a lot of processes and navigating them. I honestly thought that everybody in business knew everything. Here I was like, man, I got to learn about small business, all these set asides, contract vehicles, thinking everybody knew about them. And then that's not the case. And understanding and navigating that system is difficult. At the lowest level, I think, though, the one thing I would offer is the simple acquisition threshold. We could just raise that amount. What is the threshold under which a contracting officer or an organization can acquire something without needing to compete it and not needing a set aside or anything like that? Take that already existing process and just raise the threshold in order to get after, because right now I think it's 250,000, and that gets you one full-time employee, or hopefully, or maybe a small instance of a software or other type of technology company. So if you raise that threshold and open that, and then collect the data, look at it in a year from now or 2 years from now and see if it was effective. And then maybe it competes a little bit with what might be a CIBR or STTR program, where those small innovative companies of a few people are trying to find their open door. That's an easy solution that I would just, takes no change except for a slight elevation in that monetary amount.
Anybody else? It's your platform, King for a day. Just today, actually, you have like 2 minutes.
I would change the culture. So I think to some extent, and Zach, you kind of mentioned this, there's actually a lot of opportunities if you're creative, whether it's with the FAR or any sort of the programs that we have, or the different, different authorities to do certain things, like NTIS, right, has the JD authority, all these sort of things. What I think, though, is a lot of times the culture and the risk aversion holds us back. So, one of the things I threw out there is like, there's a difference between security compliance and being secure. Two wholly different things, right? And I would say, if you look back at some of the early blockchain testing that the government did, Ethereum, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but doesn't use a NIST-approved algorithm, right, to base for security. And that doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that, it's not NIST approved. It just wasn't on the NIST list. So should that stop us from using something? And if we could change the culture, I think it's available to do it, right? We can do that. It's just the culture is extremely risk adverse.
I think what's interesting is, if, especially with the three of you up here and talking about the acquisition authorities, the culture, in your opinions, do you think that the government understands software and data from an acquisition perspective in the same way, and the ability to go out and acquire and integrate it, that we do big hardware and platforms? And have you experienced any obstacles with that?
No, they don't understand it yet.
That was your second softball.
Yeah. Although I think folks appreciate the problem, but it's intangible that it is innately harder to value at an enterprise level, mission level software. What value are you getting from a unit of delivered code? Then I can count a thing, I can buy that thing that I've counted. I know when I expend it, relatively how much it's going to cost to reacquire it. It's largely within a contract structure that is either giving me that very same thing or a block variant of a thing that I know the deviations in capability relative to what I had before. It is wholly different when it comes to how to evaluate the capability that's being delivered by an API, an application, the underlying architecture of a software stack that has been through our own NRE. I'll talk specifically about Anduril. Over the course of the last 5.5 years, we've invested, predominantly our own IRAD in the development of our operating system Lattice. Lattice informs how we develop our own hardware systems. It informs how we integrate into third-party systems. And heaven forbid that we would ever approach the government about how to understand structuring a license around a Lattice instance. We don't. It's frankly to our benefit to talk about how we government purpose right that capability, how we then appropriately value the NRE that's been invested in its development. Is that the right way to think about building a business around what we've invested in the Lattice platform? No, but it's the most tangible conversation that we can have with the government program office today. That's one point. The other is, I think the government's still yet to appreciate that for truly robotic systems, they are advantaged in, back to the important role of integrator, of going with a software system integrator for a software defined hardware product. So let's take, let's take robotic combat vehicle in the Army. Like, is your first instinct that it should be a General Dynamic, a BAE, pick your vehicle provider, Oshkosh, I go down the list, that should be providing and priming that vehicle that has no human in it. It is not protecting a human directly. It is not carrying a human. It is being missionized to support humans. But it is the software mission system that is ultimately enabling the operation orchestration of that one vehicle, operating it across a formation in support of a dismounted infantry unit. What is ultimately enabling that capability? What is enabling you to modernize that capability as new technology comes online? Better in-wear camera, better Group 2 intercept, better comms package for long-range fires. That is likely going to be borne out by those that understand the software that is defining that vehicle, enabling its operation in concert with other vehicles. But the program offices understand hardware lead systems integrators today. So not a knock on them, but I think this is going to be another generational evolution over the next decade and a half of they're going to have to confront the fact that they need within the industrial base a set of companies that bring a software defined perspective to hardware enabled systems. But that's not largely what we have today. So how we think about the industrial policy around that is going to be critically important.
Do either of you have kind of any closing comments on this, and we can open up to the audience?
I'll pass on it.
Yeah. Come on.
So I'll just add that I think, there's constraints and restraints within the government environment. And while, I would say you could categorize it as they may not understand how to acquire software. There's a very large cultural component to that does need to shift rapidly. And I think the market, the environment is telling us that we aren't making that shift quick enough. So you said it's a generational issue. I think we're staring at something that needs to happen in single-digit years, a shift internally and across the federal government. And then again, to bring in the partners and allies piece, how we integrate better. There are no two countries on the planet that have as many like information sharing agreements and other collaborative arrangements, right, through NORAD and things like that. But it is still hard to sell north and south of the border for technology companies in both Canada and the United States. And that's a problem. We identify United Kingdom, Australia, and Canada as part of the defense industrial base through the National Defense Authorization Act, and then we make it hard to acquire their technology. So it's got to happen fast. And I know, I'm not answering the question. I'm doing a great job of admiring the problem, but it's important to acknowledge it now, because as we start to transition into, we're already in great power competition, this era. If we don't start to think about this in terms of the culture shift, getting it done in less than a generation, and understanding how to acquire these capabilities in a meaningful way to get that deterrence of, the capability with capacity and credibility as rapidly as possible, we risk, significant effects down the road. So negative effects, of course.
appreciate that. And I think that was a perfect question to end on. I will turn it over to the audience in case there are any questions. Go ahead.
Sure.
Yep.
I'm Mike Snyder with Metronome. So I got a question. You mentioned it briefly, the operators being a key component, the operational needs of driving the tech development, the product development. But what we're seeing, the valley of death is as much a gap between the tech and the end users, with the acquisition team sort of standing between that or being a filter or playing a game of telephone or whatever. What are some examples where you've been able to shorten that feedback loop or that communications loop with the operational users to really clarify mission effects, mission outcomes, what you're aiming towards or where your products are going towards? And how have some of the acquisitions organizations enabled that?
So I'll summarize the question for those that may not have heard it. How have we closed the gap between one, gaining access to operational users for which we believe we have an identified, developed technology solution that at least starts to address part of their problem. And then let's presuppose that we've identified that right set of folks. How are we bridging the gap between what the operational community often says that they might want and what then the requirements and acquisition community within the providing program office is willing and able to provide. So I'll use our partnership with SOCOM as an example. It probably won't surprise folks in this room that, SOCOM operates a smidge differently than the other acquisition executives and services that have acquisition authority. They've been a tremendous partner to Anduril over our first 5.5 years. Our biggest program with them is our system integration partnership for countering unmanned aerial systems. We had, first engaged with them back in 2018 when the problem was originally Group 1, Group 2 defeat, believing that the ability to detect track ID had been solved. It quickly became clear that as many of those short-range air defense programs from the primes were trying to come down into the threat profiles around Group 1 and Group 2s. One, they were overpowered both by way of range, but also by way of the relative value of their defeat mechanisms against the cost of the cheap things that were threatening both U.S. and partner forces and the CENTCOM AOR. And we were fortunate to be able to then have a defined operational problem with a serious gap in the sufficiency of the fielded solutions today to close on that problem, and a user that was demanding of its acquisition executive a series of experimentations and demonstrations to test, iterate, and then field those systems that were proving to be both effective and reliable over time. And, the engagements that we've had with SOCOM, persuaded them that, part of the value of us as a partner was not just in our ability to understand the problem and field mature capabilities. Clearly, it was the fact that we approached them about an acquisition strategy for solving it that wasn't just our solution. We recognize that there are current capabilities in inventory, whether that's an RF detect or defeat capability. There are going to be kinetic intercept capabilities that are more effective or already fielded that we should be expected to integrate with. So how can we field as a service against a mission this capability? So as an integration partner, our job is to collaborate with our partner in SOCOM to evaluate continuously the capabilities that are best engineered against the problems that are facing our downrange forces. And it's that feedback loop from the users back to the program office that's saying what we're getting remains insufficient. And the pressure's on us to, whether that's a software update, improving the look angles of the fielded radar systems, whether it is integrating a different comms package, whether it's improving site-to-site connectivity across those defended sites. That pressure is continuous rather than I've fielded the system, we've determined that it's insufficient, but it's the system we have. So I'm just going to keep fielding it until there's another competed opportunity to improve it. And, that model has gained at least awareness, the JCO, Joint Capability Office, in the Army for counter unmanned systems led by General Gainey, has been going through a number of experimentations and demonstrations for counter UAS as a service. So the Army is starting to evaluate how they adopt elements of this model. So it's a play that's not easily repeated, but it's one in which such that you can get that alignment through an acquisition strategy to an operational user where you have your advantage. If you're just trying to push the solution through the knot holes that you already know, more likely than not, your operational user are going to be met with frustration. You've got to buy those acquisition executives in early.
Can I chime in quickly? So really quick, we're enterprise software, so we don't exactly apply to what you're saying, but I would say align the incentives correctly. And if you look at Snowflake, we are a consumption-based software. So it's not butts and seats, which I'm sure you've seen a lot of those. You consume us. And as a publicly traded company, we do not realize revenue until you actually consume what you buy, right? So it stays on the liability side of our balance sheet. You set those incentives up and you look at our sales force, you look at all that stuff, they're there to actually make it work.
I'm going to put it back on Dave to answer this a little bit from the partners and allies as well, from that broader feedback matrix that you have, distilling kind of that cross correlation of requirements. What are they really asking for? How can you really apply against that? And what that feedback looks like from a broad international market perspective.
Yeah, so I'll just go back a little bit to what I said earlier about my background in the counter ID community. So working, the operational requirements were clear in the early days of Afghanistan, and we created mechanisms for collaborating and sharing, private. So you'd have these events, and there was this entire market built up around solving problems quickly. You had these operators defeating IEDs with 2-liter water bottles and explosive charges, and innovating downrange. So fast forward, and the market is created within the Five Eyes and then again within NATO to solve these problems at scale. Industry is pulled in. Well, those operational requirements continue to exist right now, but where are those forums where we can bring international industry together? And I don't mean at the, these large international air shows. I mean at this tactical level. And again, Soft Week is a great example of that, where you have, small businesses, large businesses, you have operators from across the special operations community, international allies as well, and talking requirements. And there are acquisition professionals, the PEOs are in the room getting these quick pitches. It's, those types of events are too few and too far between.
Okay, I'm gonna just ignore Tyler's cutting me off really quickly. Is there any opportunity for one or two more questions from the audience? I think this is a great way to kind of end the day if you have it. Otherwise,
it's got to be a really good.
It has to be a great question. Yeah. Oh, you there, right there. Yes, you.
So just on the great power,
You got to speak up.
On the great power competition note you made earlier.
Yeah.
There have been some great predictions about when that might become kinetic. Do any of you have any perspectives from all of your experiences about how, again, the DoD should change or needs to change if that happened like in, I'm just going to say 5 years? Thoughts?
So essentially, he wants to solve a problem that nobody else can, or answer a question that nobody can answer well right now. Yeah. I mean, I think I will say the great thing, we've had catalyst events over the last 5 years that accelerated some of these conversations, right? Like, I'm in a supply chain risk management company, and half the world didn't know what a supply chain was before COVID. But now we're talking about these integrated supply chains across industry, and these studies that are being done where, aerospace and defense and oil and gas companies share maybe 5 to 10% of their third-party suppliers. But the second tier, deeper in those supply chains, it's like 70 to 80% shared. We weren't asking those questions before COVID. And now we are. And then Ukraine accelerated that. Again, another catalyst event to say, where are we getting our titanium from? And, noble gases, no one cared where argon came from necessarily until we didn't get it and realize how essential it is to some of the manufacturing of high-tech components, right? So these catalyst events are occurring, the conversations are happening. And there is an acknowledgement, I think, within this, the community of action, if you will, that we are in this era of great power competition. And so what does that mean? I don't know. That's a great dodge of answering the question. So no, but I can't tell you, I can't make a prediction except to say that we are better postured now than certainly we were pre-COVID. And that's from my perspective around answering some of these supply chain questions, but I think as well, how we mobilized to provide capability to the Ukrainians downrange, is equally as important.
So a little abstract, but I believe that, people really follow leaders, and especially leaders with values. And if you take that up to the geopolitical level, I think that is the space that the United States can fill, right? But it does mean that we have to come back to the basics of leadership, and we have to come back to the basics of our values.
Yeah.
No, not nothing. Just trying to figure out what to concisely say in time that we've already expended. Okay. Yeah, I would say, relative to, let's just take when I was in the department, 2014, 2016. There was across the executive branch, legislative branch, an uneven appreciation of the both geopolitical, direct diplomatic and military challenges that a rising China or a thrashing Russia would present to the United States directly, and then more indirectly to our allies and partners. There has been, again, all things relative, meaningful progress since that time period in terms of how we recognize and appreciate the holistic nature of the challenge of how we contend with a potential adversary that has interests that run counter to ours and arguably the most important region that in the world over the next 2 decades. We have a set of circumstances now where the way in which we are planning, integrating, demonstrating capability, both within the U.S. program, but also jointly with our allies and partners, only continues to grow. So not a snowflake, but a snowball. I do think these efforts will compound over time. The question is, will they compound in a sufficient amount of time? And I'm not going to answer that question.
So I don't have
Thank you.
music, so I got to just come up here and stand over you.
You're just going to beatbox?
Yeah.
Beatboxes?
Oh, yeah, I was expecting that.
We're not ready. That'd be during happy hour.
Okay. Well, I just want to say thank you to the audience, and I really appreciate our panelists providing the human element to how they've gotten to where they are today, based on that foundation that we heard from earlier, as far as what does the ecosystem look like. And I thought Jamie really set it up. Where did we come from? Where are we now? And where can we go? And I think these 3 panelists really expressed to you, based on their own individual, MCU origin stories of what it looks like, not just where they are currently in their journeys, but where we might be able to go is not just a US-based ecosystem, but as a global one. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, guys. All right, I'm going to ask Peter real quick, just to give a couple closing remarks. I will say on just behalf of myself, thank you for tolerating me and sticking around all day. I know these can sometimes get pretty stuffy. We've tried to sort of mix it up. There will be ample alcohol if that's your thing after this. And Senior Dixon, go.
All right, everyone. Hey, so the thing that I've heard persistently throughout this is that this was not the typical rumpled suit, type of event that some folks maybe expected when they showed up here, and that the event kind of outkicked its coverage. That doesn't happen. As individuals, that happens as a team, and the folks that really did a lot of effort putting this together. So I just ask for another round of applause for them, please. Hell of a job. And then look, we're a startup. So putting on an event like this, it's a big deal for us. And we would not have pulled it off if not for all the companies that have partnered with us that you saw, many of which you saw out there. Round of applause for them. And sponsors, AWS, Carahsoft, Rise8, Productable, companies that really came through for us and gave us the bandwidth to be able to do something like this. Again, phenomenal to have partners like this. And really it does, to quote Crystal, who was on our board for a long time, it really is a team of teams approach. And we're all of us are rowing in the same direction on this. So really hope everybody is leaving today with a lot of food for thought, and a lot of inspiration, because what we're doing is hard and there are easier ways to go out and make a buck. But we're in this because the country needs us and needs us in this fight. And so thank you for your patriotism and your persistence. And thank you for being here today.